Yeah, that's a thing that happened. More on that in a minute. I went winter camping at Silent Lake Provincial Park as my first camping experience with my brand new Tesla Model 3. The goal was to put it through its paces and get an idea what it's like to camp with that car and EVs in general. I used basic autopilot to get there and back, which performed basically flawlessly in winter conditions except for 2 phantom braking events. And overnight I slept in the car. I got to test camp mode and just get more familiar with the car in a camping setting. I had the HVAC on overnight, I had the temperature set to 15 degrees Celsius and the fan level set on 2. And with the outside temperature getting down to minus 13 degrees Celsius overnight, the power being used broke roughly even with how much power was being drawn in off of the 120 volt outlet that I was plugged into, which is about 1440 watts. Went to bed at 46% and woke up with 46%. Now I wouldn't think it would use that much power to just run the HVAC on a low temperature overnight, but one commenter actually pointed out something interesting, that a lot of that power coming in off of the wall outlet was probably being used to keep the battery warm so that it could charge in the first place. I'd be interested to do a point-to-point comparison during the summer and see if it could still charge overnight while running the HVAC off a standard wall outlet. It was my first time using a trickle charger, and I found that the Tesla limits the inbound current to only 12 amps, which means a max charging of 1.44 kilowatts, and that's even if the circuit and the cord can run higher. The extension cord that I have, for instance, is rated for 1625 watts. And I'll do a whole video on my entire charging setup in the future. And another commenter actually raised another interesting point. If you leave the cord all coiled up together in warmer weather, that can actually be a fire risk. And I did notice while I was camping, when I woke up in the morning, that the coiled up section of the extension cord had actually melted through the snow down to the ground. In warmer weather, especially when it's super dry and forest fires are a risk, that is something I will have to keep in mind. So this simple overnighter definitely made me realize there's a few things that I'm missing, namely some traction boards, which I went out and just picked up a super simple cheap pair from Walmart. They're not exactly max tracks, but they'll do for now. I also realized that a lot of these campgrounds have RV outlets, the 30 amp 125 volt outlets. That's good for about 3 kilowatts to safely charge from, which is twice what I can pull from a standard wall outlet. So if I'm going to be using the car for camping a lot, that is definitely one adapter I'll need to get a hold of. The way I slept in the car was in the trunk. Now you wouldn't think it from the outside because it doesn't look like that big of a car, but with the rear seats folded down, and it's a pass-through from the rear into the trunk with the seats folded down almost like a hatchback. But in that configuration, there is more than enough room for someone like me to sleep back there. For reference, I'm 5'10", give or take about 240 pounds, and there was plenty of room back there. I had to stretch and like really push my feet out to touch the trunk. Lots of headroom to sit up, even when you have bulky winter camping sleeping bags. You have to remember that I'm used to sleeping in this tiny little one-man tent, and by comparison, the inside of the car has a lot more space. That's even with all of my camping gear in there. And now we get to the part where the car had to get towed. When I got to the campground, the whole thing was plowed, including the campsite. I pulled up and I parked at the edge of the campsite close to the electrical outlets, and what I didn't realize when I pulled in to park, right at the edge of the plowed area, it kind of dipped a little bit towards the road that I came in on. And that's where I parked. So when I parked the car, I was off camber like this. And when I realized that, I tried to move the car, but it was super slippery. Instead of being able to get out of that position, I just managed to work my way lower and lower towards the tree and the electrical outlets that were sitting there. And while I put quite a lot of it on camera, it did not go over the extreme lengths I went to try and get that car out of there. I tried hammering wood under the rear wheels, had a guy across the way with some Max Tracks offer me some of his Max Tracks to help get the car out of there, which I wound up destroying one of this poor guy's Max Tracks. I actually had the tires running so hard to try and get out of there that I actually started making them smoke. They got so hot that they actually started to melt a little bit and flake off. My tires were smoking. 3-week-old car. Spent hours and hours trying to get that car unstuck, and just it wasn't happening. Clearly, the Tesla Model 3's default all-season tires are not meant for those conditions, and it's only a rear-wheel drive, it's not all-wheel drive, so I wound up having to call a tow truck guy that was 40 minutes away because no one else closer could or would come to get me unstuck, and because of how far the guy had to come, just to pull me 2 feet onto level ground, it cost me $280. That is the most expensive 2 feet I've ever traveled in my life. Brand new car, literally 3 weeks old since I took delivery at the time. I had to figure out how to get the front tow hitch installed, figure out where the guy was going to ratchet strap to the car to pull on it. Broke my knife trying to pop the panel off on the front of the car to put in the tow hitch. But at the end of the day, he was able to do a 2-point connection on my rear rim with the aero cover removed and the front tow hitch, and he pulled me out sideways onto level ground where I was then able to move and get out of that sticky situation. And you know what? Truth is, I don't regret it at all. My mission statement here is to push EVs to their limits and see what they're truly capable of in an outdoors adventuring context. And I'd say this past adventure kind of fits that bill. This was my first time having to get a car towed out of a situation like that, let alone a brand new one and an EV at that. I'm sure the tow truck guy was shaking his head at this city boy who got his brand new electric car stuck in the snow. It was a good learning experience, albeit an expensive one, and it definitely won't be the last, nor the last time I get myself into a stupid situation. I'll open the floor. Let me know what kind of adventures you guys want to see me get up to with this car.